Jim Irsay lowers the boom on Dan Snyder. And oh, yeah, the Commanders have a new quarterback. That's coming up on this jam packed, crazy episode of the Locked On Commanders podcast.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Commanders fans, we're in this together, good or bad. We'll survive this somehow. Welcome in to a new edition of the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It never ends. The carnage is real, my friends. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube and the new WUSA 9 Plus app, your CBS affiliate in Washington, D.C., a new streaming app that is available for you on your Roku or Amazon Fire TV stick. We thank you for joining us and making us your first listen and view of the day. My co-host David Harrison is covering the Washington Commanders for SI's Fan Nation and Commander Country. He is off on this particular episode. I am Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst show on the Team 980 and the Audacy app, 9 a.m. to noon Eastern time, Monday through Friday with Pete Medhurst, or anytime, on demand, free, live on Audacy and the Audacy app, along with this show. You can listen to this show as well on the Audacy app. When we're not here or there, we are going absolutely bat-you-know-what crazy, and on Twitter at dharrison82. I told David not to get involved. I told him this is what happens. They ruin your life. I'm just telling you. At WrestleMania621 and at LO Commanders. He did not listen. Breaking news from the owners' meetings in New York City on Tuesday evening. Jim Irsay, the Colts owner. Oh, man, did he lower the boom. Yes, indeed. But first, we tell you that this particular edition of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, let's get to it. Jim Irsay, the Colts owner, the one that Commanders fans loathe and hated because he had some interesting, somewhat mildly controversial criticisms of Carson Wentz and believed to have drove the vehicle that got Carson Wentz out of Indianapolis. So Commanders fans didn't like him, but now, now you guys probably love Jim Irsay, right? Why? Because Jim Irsay, when talking to the media on Tuesday afternoon in New York at the owners' meeting, said, quote, "It's a difficult situation." When asked about Dan Snyder, "I don't know. We're going to get into more discussion on that, about potential removal, voting, dysfunction, all of that stuff. But here's where it gets really juicy." And I mean really juicy. Quote, "I believe that there's merit to remove him as owner of the former team name." Now, I'm not allowed to say that team name on this particular podcast. Just the rules. I don't make them. I just follow them. I just work here. But he used the old team name. You know what team name that is. I think it's something that we have to review and look at the evidence, and we have to be thorough going forward. I think it's something that has to be given serious consideration to. This is a real live NFL owner saying, hey, by the way, serious merit, serious consideration. We have to look at the evidence, but we have a predisposed notion. We haven't really had official discussions. We haven't had clandestine meetings, but he's well aware of what's been reported and what's been going on and what has been alleged, and so many potential landmines to deal with and step around that affect not only Dan Snyder, but also the rest of the National Football League. And nobody is saying Jim Irsay is a saint. So before you go there, let's not go there. Jim Irsay has had some publicly documented issues with some demons, right? Nobody's saying he's perfect. Nobody's perfect. Nobody expects perfect. Let's just stop. Jim Irsay is still an owner, as far as we know, in good standing with the National Football League, right? His team is one of the more model franchises. Again, one of the more model franchises. Very different than the Washington Commanders. Now, the Commanders, in response to that, and Irsay said more, issued a team statement saying, quote, "It is highly inappropriate, but not surprising." Oh, a shot at Jim Irsay. That Mr. Irsay opted to make public statements publicly based on falsehoods in the media. The blame the media trick, huh? It is unfortunate that Mr. Irsay decided to go public with his statement today, while an investigation is in process. And the team had no opportunity to formally respond to the allegations. Well, they have. They had their lawyer call anyone and everyone that he wanted to talk to, and that might be a sympathetic voice. And that's what happened. So the Commanders also, as part of their statement, said, they said the team had no opportunity to formally respond to allegations. Quote, "The Commanders have made remarkable progress over the past 2 years." Nobody's denying that. We are confident that when we have when he has an opportunity to see the actual evidence in this case, Mr. Irsay will conclude that there is no reason for the Snyders to consider selling the franchise. And here's the kicker, and they won't. So the Commanders took plenty of shots at Jim Irsay in this statement of theirs, right? Jim Irsay obviously took his shots. It's very clear that Jim Irsay and Dan Snyder don't like each other. And in my mind, it's very clear that Jim Irsay was one of the owners, if not the only owner, that was cooperating with media all these months and leaking all of these quotes anonymously. Hey, we're counting votes. Hey, we're doing this. Hey, we're doing that, right? Beyond clear. I mean, they would deny that. He would deny that. I don't care. It's the truth as I see it. Now, what's interesting is this was a one-day meeting, but there'll be another meeting between the two teams, the Indianapolis Colts and the Washington Commanders, next Sunday at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. Again, it's hard to believe that Irsay wasn't one of the owners, maybe the only owner, I don't know, behind all of the anonymous quotes over the last several months. Remember again how many times Commanders fans were upset at Jim Irsay? Well, now they probably want to send him Christmas gifts, because if it leads to the removal and the upheaval and the forcing of whether vote, pressure, what have you, of Dan Snyder, they'll be joyous. Now, Jim Irsay didn't just leave it right there. He said, quote, "I just believe in the workplace today, the standard that the Shield," meaning the NFL, stands for, that you have to stand for that and protect that. He's saying stand for it and protect and believe in the integrity of the NFL. I just think that once owners talk amongst each other, which indicates that they haven't, at least in his eyes, they'll arrive to the right decision. My belief is that, unfortunately, I believe that's the road we probably need to go down. And we just need to finish the investigation, Mary Jo White. But, and here's a money quote, "it's gravely concerning to me, the things that have occurred there over the last 20 years. Again, this is not about the last 2 years, despite whatever the Commanders want you to believe. This is about 20 plus years. Then Jim Irsay was asked if there are 24 votes, meaning you need 24 out of the 31 owners to vote affirmative to remove Dan Snyder. Quote, "I think potentially there will be. Not that there is definitely 24 votes. I think potentially there will be. Now, Roger Goodell spoke to reporters on Tuesday evening as well, calling it an ongoing investigation. When Mary Jo White is done, we'll share that with the membership and the public, blah, 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 blah. He said Dan Snyder's status has not changed. And he was asked if he was surprised or upset at Jim Irsay's comments about Dan Snyder and the Commanders. He said no. Oh, and then Dan Snyder got some defense from his buddy Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. He said, quote, "It's a media issue more than an ownership issue." Ah, Jerry. Pals defending pals. That's right. All right. Dan Snyder has written a lawyer to other NFL owners. What did he say in it? Well, we'll have it for you next, right here on this wild and crazy edition. Is it starting to really happen? Edition of the Locked On Commanders podcast. But first, we want to tell you guys about our friends at LinkedIn. That's right. LinkedIn Jobs, you know, baby. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain, right, that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. You want to make sure that you don't end up with a mess and bad employees and turmoil and all sorts of problems, right? There might be an NFL team that's been dealing with that for 20-plus years. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn Jobs are going to find the right people. They're going to make sure that your team is stocked with depth, with quality, right? And they're going to get it to you faster and for free. So here's the deal. I tell you guys all the time, when I was running a small business, I had to do all this myself. If I had LinkedIn Jobs at that point a couple of years ago, I would have been able to find the best candidates right away nationally, right? People that I didn't even know to help me cover this outfit. That's what LinkedIn Jobs can do. So when you post your job, add your job to your profile, and then add the purple #hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, you spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions, they make it easy to focus on the candidates with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you want to interview and then who you want to hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to, and faster, guys. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, thanks again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and first view of the day. Make sure you check out NFL Key Predictions every Friday on Locked On NFL. Locked On's local experts give you the inside scoop on the 5 biggest games of the NFL weekend, including Sunday and Monday Night Football, plus betting advice from the field's leading experts at BetOnline. Follow NFL Key Predictions every Friday on Locked On NFL. It's available on the Audacy app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so Dan Snyder wrote a letter on Tuesday morning that was distributed to some in the media on Tuesday evening to other NFL owners. That's who he addressed the letter to, I guess, to the other 31 owners, right? So the media was given a copy of the letter, presumably from the Commanders organization, and it said, quote, "I hope that you and your family are doing well. I would like to address a recent ESPN article that contains false and malicious statements about the Washington Commanders, our management team, and me and my family. It is particularly shameful for ESPN to diminish the very real accomplishments of our president, Jason Wright, who ESPN alleges was placed at the Commanders by the league and has no power to make real change. I know you know this to be false. Unfortunately, ESPN ignored our efforts to correct the many falsehoods in their article before its publication." There is one allegation in the ESPN article that I feel it is important to address immediately. And again, this is an open letter from Dan Snyder. Actually, not an open letter. It's an open letter now. It was a private letter to each of the individual NFL owners, circulated to them on Tuesday morning. The article cited unnamed sources who said, quote, they've been told that Snyder instructed his law firm to hire private investigators to look into other owners and Commissioner Goodell. Dan went on. That is patently false and intended to erode the trust and goodwill between owners that I take quite seriously. I have never hired any private investigator to look into any owner or the commissioner. I have never instructed or authorized my lawyers to hire any private investigator on my behalf for any such purpose, and I never would. While we are all fierce competitors on the field, we are a part of this organization because we love football, our teams, and our fans. Having the privilege to own a franchise in America's sport is something I know none of us take for granted. Falsehoods and lies being spread about any of our organizations hurts our league, our players, and our fans, and we simply cannot let them go unchallenged. Thank you for taking the time to read this. If you have any questions, Tanya and I are available to answer them. Always available to answer. And we look forward to discussing these issues with you at the appropriate time. Sincerely, Dan Snyder. So my first reaction to this is, it's a very nice letter. It's charming and well written for the most part, from what I can tell. I would say this. Listen, I've talked to many ex-employees that feel that there were investigators, private detectives, shadowy figures lurking, trying to ask them questions, showing up at their door. Listen, again, I can't tell you that those people are not all lying, but I know I've talked to several that have said this and that it has happened. That's all I can tell you. I cannot prove that it did happen or didn't happen. All I can relay to you is what was relayed to me by people that I know and trust and worked with. When I worked in the building for Dan Snyder's own radio station for 5 years. And again, as I always say, Dan and I, we had absolutely no problem. Dan and I had pleasant conversations. But there is a long-standing history of dysfunction and terrible workplace culture that I'm sorry and changes doesn't just cover up. Not to mention the football disaster and dysfunction and the money and the erosion of the fan base and the stadium issue and potential other issues that the DC Attorney General, that the Congress is dealing with, the House Oversight Committee, and other attorney general offices in the area are dealing with, and so on and so forth. And maybe we'll find out from Mary Jo White. Now, Dan Snyder says he has never hired any investigator to investigate, again, other owners or Roger Goodell. That's fine. That's fine. Maybe he hasn't. I mean, I'll take him at his word. I'll take him at his word. But you don't need to. You don't need to hire people like private investigators and shadowy figures. Let's just call them that. Henchmen. You don't need to do that to dig up dirt. You don't need to do that. People can find out things about other people just by talking to people. Just by talking to people. And maybe you have proof. Maybe you don't have proof. Maybe you talk to multiple people. Maybe you talk to one or two people. I don't know. We all talk to people, right? I know I talk to people. I don't have the proof 100% of what gets told to me. But I know who the people are that I talk to, and I know that they haven't led me wrong, and that they haven't lied to me, and that things that they have said over and over and over and over again are true. So maybe Dan is right that he's never hired any shadow investigator, any detective, anybody to investigate Roger Goodell, Jerry Jones, or the rest of the NFL owners to dig up dirt, as the ESPN article alleged. Maybe that's true. Hopefully it's true. Doesn't mean that you don't have dirt. It doesn't mean that you haven't been poking around. It doesn't mean that you haven't been talking to other people who know people who know people who know people. You get my point? We can all find out things that we want to find out, guys. We don't have to hire private investigators. It's just my initial response. You may disagree with that. That's fine. You're entitled to. Please always feel free to hit us up at Russellmania621 or at LO Commanders. David is at D Harrison 82. But I wanted to read that letter to you, and I wanted to spell it out. Obviously, we have the Irsay comments, and that is really what is the breaking news. And where we go from here, I don't know. You heard Roger Goodell's reaction, saying he's not surprised or angry. What does that tell you? Remember, Dan and Roger Goodell have been at odds for a long time. Dan and Roger Goodell have been at odds for a long time. We've detailed the many ways Dan and Jerry tried to get Roger Goodell ousted as NFL commissioner with Papa John over there. Dan railroaded the league and Roger Goodell the morning of Roger Goodell's Super Bowl press conference in LA last year. 6 hours after announcing that they were going to conduct a private second investigation with some weird firm and putting a big story out on ESPN about it. ESPN. Roger Goodell basically took Dan by the neck and threw him in front of an 18-wheeler and ran over him and said, no way, no chance, not happening. They have no right to do it. They were told not to do it. We've instructed it. We've made it clear they will not be doing it. And boom, all of a sudden, that investigation went away and it turned into the Mary Jo White investigation. Just remember, Dan Snyder and Roger Goodell have been at odds. Now, I'm not saying Roger Goodell has handled everything right. He has not. He is not. But just remember, I strongly believe, based on every bit of evidence that I have and people that I've talked to behind the scenes, that Roger Goodell does not have Dan Snyder's back. Jerry Jones does. And unfortunately for Commanders fans that want Dan Snyder out, Jerry Jones is more powerful right now and moving forward than Roger Goodell. All right, guys, we wrap up the show with a news of a new quarterback and what to do with the old one. But first, we want to tell you about our friends at BetOnline. That's right, BetOnline. You know they are your number one source for football betting and information this season. The Green Bay Packers are minus 5.5-point favorites at minus 110 as of Tuesday evening on BetOnline. Find out all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and more in-depth articles and analysis on every game at BetOnline. The Commanders are plus 185 on the money line in this Sunday's game at FedEx Field on BetOnline. As always, BetOnline remains your number one source for in-game live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The over-under for Sunday's game at minus 110. Over or under is 41.5. Two teams that have struggled to score. If you need information on whatever your favorite sport is so that you can properly put your money where you want to put it, betonline.net. Or use your mobile device to learn more at BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we're wrapping up the Locked On Commanders podcast on this crazy midweek edition. Tuesday might have been a game-changing moment for the Washington Commanders franchise. We'll see where it goes from here. But clearly, there is angst among the NFL ownership, as we've been trying to tell you for years. I've been doing this podcast since 2018, I believe. Maybe 2019. I can't even remember. It's been a lot of days. And I've been trying to tell you that the NFL while far, far, far from perfect, that there has been a lot of angst and movement quietly behind the scenes to divide Dan Snyder from the league in some way, shape, or form. It appears we found who was partially driving that vehicle to some degree. All right, the Commanders signed Jake Fromm to the practice squad on Tuesday and released defensive tackle Donovan Jeter. Fromm, the quarterback who played at Georgia, the defending national champions, was a fifth-round pick in 2020 of the Buffalo Bills. You might remember that Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, run that operation, and they were at one point, don't know the exact status of their relationship now, very, 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 very close with Ron Rivera and Marty Herney. So Fromm was drafted by the Buffalo Bills in 2020, and as well developed by Ken Dorsey partially, who has connections to Ron and the Carolina staff. And Fromm was ultimately released, signed back to the practice squad, and then claimed by the New York Giants last year, right? He started 2 games when signed to the Giants in December with Daniel Jones hurt and Mike Glennon and that whole situation. Remember, it was a mess. Even though Glennon started that final game for the New York Giants against the Washington then football team, again, Fromm did start 2 games for the Giants. He didn't play terribly. He didn't play well. At Georgia, 78 career touchdowns, 18 career interceptions, plus 3 rushing touchdowns, a 63+% career completion rate during his 3 years with the Bulldogs. So we will see where he goes from here. The one thing that I will say, and this is a smart move because you need to get a quarterback in the system. And a lot of the system should be familiar to from what they were doing in Buffalo. Again, Dorsey, Brian Daboll, not that it'll be exact, but there should be some familiarity there, I believe, from what Washington is running and their terminology and what have you. Because of the connections. Now, again, Brian Daboll was there. So Brian Daboll was not the Giants head coach when the Giants claimed him, but I'm just pointing out that there could be some familiarity, which is important because Taylor Heineke is going to start for the Commanders this Sunday against the Green Bay Packers. We knew that. That became official on Tuesday. And that means Sam Howell will be the backup and in uniform for the first time. And that means 1 snap away. If something happens to Heineke, then Sam Howell goes in. Armani Rogers is the emergency quarterback on Sunday because Jake Fromm is going to be on the practice squad, and he's not even going to be active in all likelihood. But my point is, if something happens to Heineke, then if he's knocked out and can't play the next game against Indianapolis, well, then Jake Fromm is 1 play away, 1 snap away from being in a game for the Washington Commanders. Now, Carson Wentz officially had surgery on Monday, as we told you about on the last episode. A reported timeline of 4 to 6 weeks. However, for now, the Commanders have not put him on IR as of Tuesday evening. And the belief is if they even put him on IR, it's going to be later this week after they get a further update. He's already apparently rehabbing, going to stay in LA. We'll see. It would be another mistake. I'll say it. It will be another mistake if they're told, hey, 4 weeks minimum or 4 weeks ideally, and that they don't put him on IR. I would just say that. One last note before we hit the road. Deshaun Jackson, former wide receiver, of course, for the Washington NFL franchise. Let's put it that way because he played here under a different name. Deshaun Jackson signed with the Baltimore Ravens on Tuesday. So good for D-Jax. He's back in the NFL. All right, we want to thank you guys again for making the Locked On Commanders podcast your first listen and view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day. Come on back for the next episode. David will have you covered on a crossover Thursday edition as we get you set for the Commanders and the Packers, and hopefully we can actually talk a little football. How about that? Novel concept, right? Isn't it, boys and girls? Now make your second listen and view the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast. If you want to hop in, 301-615-357. That's 301-615-3577 on the voicemail line, or lockedonwashingtoncommanders@gmail.com. Just want to be clear, it's very, very, very hard to get everything in. There's a million things I had to chop out of this show because we just don't have the time with everything going on with Dan Snyder in the NFL. That's going to do it for us. Thanks for joining us. For David Harrison, who's covering the Washington Commanders for Commander Country, SI.com's Fan Nation. I'm Chris Russell, one half of the Russell and Medhurst Show on the Team 980 and, again, the Audacy App, 9 to noon Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. If you need more of me, boys and girls, I'm always free and available on the Audacy App. And thank you for joining us right here on the Locked On Commanders podcast.